Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The endless expanse of stars stretched out before President Jonathan Kerrigan as he stood at the observation deck of the ISS Horizon, the state-of-the-art space station orbiting dangerously close to the event horizon of a supermassive black hole. He had always dreamed of a future where humanity could harness the power of the cosmos itself, and this mission, this daring experiment, was meant to make that dream a reality. The chatter of scientists and engineers filled the control room as they monitored the complex machinery stabilizing the experiment. Kerrigan glanced at Dr. Ryle, the project's chief scientist, whose fingers danced across the hollow controls with an intensity that mirrored the tension in the room. The entire world was watching this experiment unfold. If successful, they would unlock an energy source capable of powering Earth for centuries. This is it, Kerrigan thought, allowing himself a rare moment of hope. His presidency had been marked by crisis after crises, rising global temperatures, resource wars, and political upheaval, but today was a chance to change the trajectory of humanity forever. Dr. Ryle turned, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the monitors. "We're at optimal levels, Mr. President. We're ready to initiate the singularity stabilization sequence." Kerrigan nodded, his voice steady. "Proceed." A hum filled the air as the experiment began, the massive energy collectors positioned around the black hole engaging. Kerrigan watched, transfixed, as the black void beyond the station seemed to ripple. The black hole, a monstrous force of nature, suddenly felt closer, more present, as if it were aware of the station's efforts. For a moment, everything seemed to go perfectly. Data streamed across the monitors, and the scientists exchanged optimistic glances. But then, without warning, the ripple became a violent wave. "Energy levels are spiking!" shouted one of the engineers. The room erupted into chaos. Alarms blared, and warning lights flashed red as the black hole's gravitational pull intensified. Kerrigan felt a strange sensation, a tug deep in his chest, like something was pulling him apart. Dr. Ryle screamed over the noise, "Shut it down! We're losing control!" Before anyone could react, a blinding flash of light engulfed the room. Kerrigan's vision blurred, and he felt his body detach from the world around him. The sensation of weightlessness overtook him, not like floating in space, but as if he was being unraveled, his very essence being drawn into something vast and incomprehensible. Then, darkness. Kerrigan opened his eyes to find himself standing in a place that defied logic. He was no longer aboard the ISS Horizon. He wasn't anywhere recognizable. Around him, the space seemed to fold and twist, a bizarre landscape of shifting geometries and impossible forms. There was no up or down, no gravity to orient himself, and yet, he felt solid ground beneath his feet. "Where am I?" he muttered, his voice barely a whisper in the vast, eerie silence. "You are in the rift," a voice answered, seemingly from everywhere and nowhere. Kerrigan spun, searching for the source. A figure emerged from the undulating darkness, its form vaguely human, but shimmering, as if made of stardust and shadow. "Who are you?" Kerrigan demanded, his pulse quickening. "I am the Sentinel," the figure replied. "I guard this dimension, a place beyond time and space." "And you, Jonathan Kerrigan, have been drawn here for a purpose." Kerrigan's mind raced, struggling to comprehend. "I don't understand. How did I get here?" "The experiment you oversaw disrupted the delicate balance of the black hole," the Sentinel explained, its voice calm and measured. "Your consciousness was pulled into the rift, a space where time is fluid, and reality shifts." Kerrigan's heart sank. "So, I'm trapped here?" The Sentinel regarded him silently for a moment before responding. "Not trapped. Chosen." "Chosen for what?" "To save humanity," the Sentinel replied, its voice echoing with an otherworldly gravity. "The experiment has caused a disturbance in the fabric of the universe. If left unchecked, it will lead to the collapse of space-time itself, beginning with Earth." Kerrigan's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Collapse? What's happening to Earth? The singularity you attempted to harness has created a rift between dimensions. It is growing, consuming space and time. If nothing is done, Earth and the entire universe will be destroyed. The weight of the Sentinel's words pressed down on Kerrigan. He had spent his life making decisions that affected millions, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. Why me? Kerrigan asked, his voice low, almost pleading. I'm just a man, a politician. I can't stop something like this. The Sentinel's eyes, if they could be called that, seemed to pierce through him. You are more than that, Jonathan Kerrigan. You have led humanity through its darkest times. You have the strength and the will to make the impossible possible. And here, in the rift, you will learn to wield the power of space-time itself. Kerrigan stared at the Sentinel, disbelief warring with a strange, growing sense of determination. He had been a leader his entire life, but never had the stakes been this high. If what the Sentinel said was true, the fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. I'll do whatever it takes, Kerrigan said finally, his voice steady. Just tell me what I need to do. The Sentinel nodded. You must learn to manipulate the flow of time within this dimension. Only by mastering time-space can you reverse the effects of the singularity and prevent the collapse of your universe. But be real, the power you seek comes at great cost. The rift is full of dangers, and you will be tested. The landscape around them shifted again, the undulating forms dissolving into a vast, chaotic expanse where fragments of different realities floated by alternate Earths, strange alien worlds, and abstract concepts made manifest. Time itself seemed to bend, as Kerrigan caught glimpses of his own past and future playing out in fragments before his eyes. He saw himself as a young man, giving his first campaign speech. He saw the moment he took the oath of office. And then he saw his own funeral, crowds mourning his loss in a future that might never come to pass. The Sentinel's voice echoed in his mind. Time is not a straight line, it is a web, woven with countless possibilities. You must find the thread that leads to humanity's survival. Kerrigan felt a surge of fear and uncertainty, but he forced it down. He had faced impossible odds before: real wars, political rivalries, crises that seemed insurmountable. But this was different. This was not just about saving a nation or winning an election, this was about saving reality itself. I understand, he said, his voice firm. What do I need to do first? The Sentinel raised a hand, and a ripple passed through the air. You will begin by confronting the shadows of your past. Only by facing your greatest failures and regrets can you learn to control time. Follow the path, and you will find the answers you seek. Before Kerrigan could ask what that meant, the ground beneath his feet shifted, and he was suddenly standing in a new place, a vast, dimly lit hall that felt eerily familiar. He looked around, his breath catching in his throat. He knew this place. It was the Oval Office. But something was wrong. The room was warped, distorted, as if seen through a shattered mirror. Figures moved in the shadows of people from his past, advisors, generals, political allies, and enemies, all of them watching him with silent judgment. At the center of the room stood a figure he had hoped never to see again, his old political rival, Senator Gregor Kane. Kane's betrayal had nearly ended Kerrigan's career years ago, and the bitterness of that wound still lingered. Jonathan, Kane said, his voice dripping with venom. You never did know when to quit, did you? Kerrigan stared at the shadowy figure of Gregor Kane, his old rival, standing with a smirk that felt as cutting as the political betrayals he had endured years ago. The Oval Office felt stifling, a warped memory that twisted reality, making it hard for Kerrigan to breathe. He clenched his fists, instinctively bracing for a confrontation. But this wasn't just about reliving the past. He needed to understand what this meant, what this distorted vision was here to teach him. You always thought you could outmaneuver me, Jonathan, Kane said, his voice a blend of mockery and cold disdain. But you were too soft, too willing to compromise. That's why you lost, why you'll always lose. The words cut deeper than Kerrigan wanted to admit. He had always prided himself on his diplomacy, his ability to find common ground, even when the political landscape was fraught with hostility. But Kane had represented the darker side of politics, and the ruthless, win at all costs mentality that Kerrigan had tried to avoid. And yet, here Kane was, standing in his mind, taunting him with the possibility that his approach to leadership had been wrong all along. "This isn't real," Kerrigan muttered to himself, turning away from the figure. "This is just a projection, an illusion." But as he said it, the world around him didn't dissolve. It remained stubbornly real, the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him. He had to confront it, face this trial if he wanted to move forward. Kane's voice followed him. "You failed them, you know. The people who trusted you, the ones who believed you could save them. And now look where you are, lost, powerless, stuck in a dimension you can't control." Kerrigan stopped, breathing slowly, gathering himself. "No," he said quietly, "I made my choices, and I stand by them, even when they weren't perfect." The room seemed to ripple, as though the very air were reacting to his words. Kane's sneer faltered, and Kerrigan felt the ground under his feet solidify. This was the test. It wasn't about whether he had made the right or wrong decisions. It was about whether he could live with them, whether he could accept his past without letting it consume him. Kane's form wavered, like a shadow in the wind. "You think you've learned something? That this makes you strong? It's just the beginning. You've seen nothing yet." Kerrigan stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I may not have all the answers, I may not be able to change everything, but I can still fight for what's right." With that, the figure of Gregor Kane disintegrated into dust, and the warped Oval Office dissolved around him, the distorted edges of the vision collapsing like paper under flame. Kerrigan found himself standing once more in the ethereal landscape of the rift. The Sentinel was there, watching him with unreadable eyes. "Well done," the Sentinel said, its voice calm but approving. "You have faced the first of many trials. But know, Thesa, what lies ahead will test not just your mind, but your very soul. The power of space-time is not to be wielded lightly." Kerrigan exhaled, feeling the weight of the encounter lift from his shoulders. "I'm ready," he said. "Whatever it takes, I'll do it." The Sentinel regarded him for a long moment, then raised a hand. "You must learn to bend time now, to understand the currents of existence. Follow me." The landscape around them shifted once more, and suddenly Kerrigan was surrounded by swirling streams of light, rivers of time, cascading in every direction. Each one was a thread, a timeline of events, branching off into infinite possibilities. He could see moments from his life, moments from the lives of others, past, present, and future, all colliding in a chaotic dance. "This," the Sentinel said, "is the flow of time. To control it, you must first feel its rhythm." Kerrigan reached out instinctively, feeling the pull of the currents. It was overwhelming, the sheer magnitude of it, the endless possibilities stretching out before him. He could feel time pulling him in different directions, urging him to intervene, to change things, to manipulate outcomes. His mind raced, his senses flooded with the weight of eternity. "How do I control this?" he asked, his voice strained. "By understanding that time is not a force to be commanded," the Sentinel replied. "It is a river. You do not change the river by forcing it, you guide it by understanding its flow. Let go of your need to control. Instead, become part of it." Kerrigan closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation of the timelines flowing around him. He took a deep breath, letting go of the tension in his body, allowing himself to become one with the currents. Slowly, he felt the pressure ease, the overwhelming force of time calming into something more manageable. He wasn't fighting it anymore, he was moving with it. As he opened his eyes, he realized he could see more clearly now. The timelines were no longer a chaotic tangle. They were paths, each leading to a different future. He could sense where they lead, some toward hope, others toward destruction. "Good," the Sentinel said. "You are beginning to see. But this is only the beginning." Kerrigan turned to face the Sentinel. "What's next?" "Next," the Sentinel said, You will face the greatest threat of all, the darkness that seeks to consume everything. There is another who once tried to do what you are doing now. They failed, and in their failure, they became something else, something dangerous. Before Kerrigan could ask more, the world shifted once again, and he found himself standing in a place that felt colder, darker. The light of the timelines was dim here, as though something were sucking the energy out of the very fabric of reality. He wasn't alone. A figure stood at the center of the darkness, its form tall and imposing. It was Humana, or had once been but now it radiated a malevolent energy, a presence that twisted the space around it. "You must be the new one," the figure said, its voice a low growl. "The one the Sentinel believes can save your pitiful race." Kerrigan squared his shoulders. "Who are you?" "I was like you once," the figure said, stepping forward. Its face was obscured, but Kerrigan could feel the weight of its gaze. "I tried to control time, to save my people. But the power was too great. It consumed me, and now I am the embodiment of entropy." Kerrigan felt a chill run down his spine. This was what the Sentinel had warned him about. The dark force that sought to destroy everything. "I won't let you stop me," Kerrigan said, his voice firm. The figure laughed, a deep, mocking sound. "You think you can stop the inevitable? Time cannot be controlled. It consumes all who try." Kerrigan braced himself as the figure lunged at him, the darkness around it warping and twisting as it moved. He reached out instinctively, tapping into the currents of time around him, using what he had learned to bend the flow, to slow the figure's movements. The battle was fierce, the dark entity relentless. But Kerrigan held his ground, using the power of space-time to anticipate its attacks, to stay one step ahead. He wasn't just fighting the entity, he was fighting the forces of entropy itself, the chaos that sought to undo everything. Time splintered around them, fragments of reality collapsing and reforming as they clashed. Kerrigan could feel the strain, the immense pressure of holding the timelines together. But he couldn't stop. If he faltered, if he let go, the entity would consume everything. With a final burst of strength, Kerrigan reached deep into the currents of time, drawing on every ounce of power he had learned to control. He wrapped the entity in a web of timelines, trapping it in a loop, binding it with the very forces it sought to destroy. The entity let out a furious scream, its form dissolving as the timelines tightened around it, pulling it into the void. And then, silence. Kerrigan stood alone in the rift, the weight of the battle settling over him. He had won, but at what cost? The currents of time flowed around him, calm now, but he knew the fight wasn't over. He turned to the Sentinel, who had reappeared by his side. "You have done well," the Sentinel said. "But there is one final task. You must now use what you have learned to reset the timeline, to undo the damage caused by the experiment." Kerrigan nodded, exhausted but resolute. "I'm ready." The Sentinel gestured toward the flow of time, and Kerrigan stepped forward, reaching out once more. He could see the timeline of his world now, fragile and fractured, teetering on the brink of collapse. He took a deep breath and began to weave the threads of time, carefully guiding the flow, reversing the damage, resetting the course of history. As he worked, he felt the strain, the immense power of what he was doing. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. This was his responsibility, his burden to bear. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stepped back. The timeline was restored, the danger averted. Earth was safe. But Kerrigan knew he could never return to the life he had known. He had seen too much, learned too much. He had become something more than a leader, he had become a guardian of time itself. As he stood in the rift, watching the flow of time, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had done what needed to be done. He had saved humanity. The Sentinel's voice broke the silence. "Your journey is not over, Jonathan Kerrigan. There will always be threats to the fabric of reality. But you have proven yourself capable. You are ready." Kerrigan smiled faintly. "I'll be ready for whatever comes next." And with that, the rift dissolved around him, and he found himself back aboard the ISS Horizon, his body lying still in the medical bay. He took a deep breath, Feeling the weight of the world lift from his shoulders, he had returned. But the future would never be the same.